Right, we're just waiting for people to log on, and then the webinar will start in a few minutes. Okay, we're just waiting for people to log in. I can see people logging in. So we'll just give it a moment or two and then we'll start. I hope everybody received the copy of the text that I sent out first thing this morning. If for some reason that hasn't arrived, do let me know and I can forward that after the webinar is over. Apologies if that didn't arrive for some reason. Okay, I think people are logging in. We'll just give it another minute or so just to make sure everybody is online. Okay, well, I think we seem to have got half a dozen people. I think we need one or two more, but I think we're almost here. So I think I am going to start. I hope everybody can see me and hear me. We're going to do the Europe for Citizens program today, and that should take no more than an hour. So I'm now going to bring up the PowerPoint presentation and we'll get started. Okay, so with a bit of luck, you're all seeing the opening slide of the PowerPoint presentation. The interact slide, again, just focus on the chat. I will go back to the chat button every so often just to make absolutely certain that people are still with me, that you can hear me and see the presentation, and also to check if anybody is asking any particular questions. The background, the treaty, the mission statement, I think everybody has seen these all before. Don't need to bang on about these anymore. You'll all start to know this better than I do. Flowering of the cultures of the member states, national and regional diversity, common cultural heritage is one of the key objectives of the European Union in terms of the broad cultural sector. Europe 2020 themes, these are the themes under the Europe 2020 agenda, the mission statement for the current 10-year period. I mean, in one sense, I have to be honest and say that both of these are slightly less relevant to the Europe for Citizens program. The Europe for Citizens program is a very small program and has very, very tightly focused objectives. And in one way, the Europe 2020 themes are not directly relevant to the Europe for Citizens program. So we'll move swiftly on. Europe for Citizens is one of the transnational funds. So it's the grouping in the middle, where individuals and organizations are encouraged to work together to undertake mobility projects and so on. This comes out of that 15% of the budget that's allocated to the various transnational funds. Okay, these are the range of transnational funds. So today we're going to be looking at Europe for Citizens. You'll see that it has a budget of around 200 million euro. It's actually slightly smaller than that at the end of the day, but that was the original budget. The new one is slightly smaller. So it is the smallest of the various EU funding programs relevant to the broad culture sector. Okay, two types of grants, projects and mobility. And in a sense, Europe for Citizens, although it's a very small program, it does provide support for both projects and also mobility activities. And in a sense, these are a bit integrated. You know, the projects and the mobility activities. The mobility activities, in a way, are a project involving a lot of mobility. But I'll explain all this as we go through. There is some match funding that's necessary for the project grants within the Europe for Citizens program, and that will become clear as we go through as well. Okay, so before we start, I'm just going to double check to make sure that there are no cries of help on the questions in the chat box or anything else. People are, no questions at the moment. I see people are logging in, telling me they're logged in, so that's all good. So we will go back to the slides. Okay, Europe for Citizens program. I'll give you up front the various contact details. Now, the reason I give you this up front is that here in the UK, at least, and there's some people here are from outside the UK, you may be lucky. In the UK, we don't have a contact point for this program for various reasons that aren't worth going into. Essentially, the UK government won't put up the match funding. So if you are seeking advice and information, then if you're lucky enough, in most countries, you will have a contact point. And you can find the list of contact points in that very bottom website there. But in the UK, there is no contact point, so you may need those email addresses, because you have specific questions, then those email addresses will be relevant. They're listed under the different strands. That will obviously make sense as we go through the program. Okay. Right. Europe for Citizens program. Europe for Citizens, it's a small program, and it's, in a sense, one of the most philosophical of the programs, because it's trying to link what the European Union is trying to achieve and help people understand the way the European Union has evolved and what it's trying to do, and link that to the history of Europe in the last 100 or so years. You know, the key issues and events and thinking and values that have shaped the Europe we have today. In the light of what might be called the culture wars, or the culture wars that some people are wishing to describe them as, that are evident at the moment, particularly in the light of the events in Paris recently. In a way, I think that the Europe for Citizens program is a potential place where very interesting projects could develop. Whether the Europe for Citizens program is imaginative enough to take on board interesting projects that are really looking at some of these really challenging themes and discussions and debates is another matter. But in terms of the, the way we see the European Union evolving in the light of some of these challenges which follow on from 100 years of fairly devastating historical events across Europe, this is what the Europe for Citizens program is all about, at least in part. You'll see there that the budget is actually 185 million euros, so not quite the 203 million euro that was talked about originally. Structure, budget, objectives, and priorities. Okay. Now, there are two strands and a horizontal action. We don't need to worry about the horizontal action because that's really about sort of evaluation and valorization and things like that. This is not directly relevant. So two strands. And in the second strand, there are some sub-strands. So there's 4 strands or sub-strands overall. Strand 1, European remembrance, raising awareness of remembrance, common history and values. Strand 2, democratic engagement and civic participation, encouraging people to participate in the sort of democratic processes that sort of underpin the way in which the European Union is trying to work. And there are several sub-strands here: town twinning, networks of towns, and civil society projects. Town twinning and networks of towns are essentially mobility activities, and strand 1 and the civil society projects are projects. So you can see there's a couple of project strands and a couple of twinning, mobility strands rather, in here. Okay. Budget allocation 185 million, 20% on the remembrance strand, 60% on strand 2 on the various sub-strands there, and 10% on the valorization horizontal action. Just ignore all that. Ignore that particular area. We don't need to worry about that today. General objectives: contribute to citizens' understanding of the Union, its history and diversity, and to foster citizenship and to improve conditions for civic and democratic participation. Very, very broad themes, and within which there is the potential for cultural organizations to get involved. Specific objectives. Okay. raising awareness of remembrance, common history and values, and the Union's aim, which is to promote peace, values and well-being of its peoples by stimulating debate, reflection and the development of networks. Okay. And the second one, to encourage democratic and civic participation by developing citizens' understanding of the European Union's policy-making processes and promoting opportunities for societal and intercultural engagement and volunteering. So in a sense, the two strands here, the first one is about helping people understand the sort of factors that have made the European Union the way it is today and to understand where it hopes to go. And the second one is about helping to get people more involved in the democratic processes that, you know, the European Union leaves its taking on board in the way in which it operates. There are also annual priorities. So apart from those very broad objectives, there are then a different set of priorities each year that are given for this particular program. Okay, so for the last year, 2014, the priorities were fairly obvious. So under European remembrance, the priorities were the 100th anniversary of the beginning of World War I, 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall, and 10-year anniversary of the enlargement of the European Union to Central and Eastern Europe. So those were the themes for Strand 1. For democratic engagement, which was Strand 2, the focus was really on the elections to the European Parliament, which were held last year on the 22nd and 25th of May. So what they wanted to do was build ways in which people would seek to engage more with the debates and discussions surrounding the elections, you know, the key issues that the various parties were discussing as being important for the European Union elections at that point. So those were the themes for 2014. We are not sure, although I must admit I haven't checked for about a week, but a week ago we weren't sure what the themes are for 2015. What I will do is I'll make sure I check again at the end of this webinar, and if there are themes up for 2015, I will send you the email link for those. Okay, deadlines and start dates. Deadlines 1st of March for European Remembrance, and also for all of Strand 2. So the 1st of March is the deadline for every strand. So 1st of March, deadline for Remembrance and for town twinning and networks of towns and civil society projects. There's also an extra deadline for the mobility strands or sub-strands, town twinning and networks of towns, and that's the 1st of September. So the 1st of March, which I'm afraid is only 2.5 months away, is the next deadline for all the strands. You'll see there the start dates for these particular deadlines. I think that's fairly straightforward. Deadlines are 1st of March, then the start dates is usually after the 1st of August. For the town twinning networks of towns, it'll be after the 1st of July. Hope that's clear. Publication. They notified at the latest 4 months, so within 4 months after the application deadline, you will know about that. You'll be informed in writing, and there are various websites there that provide information on previous successes if you are interested in that. Okay, some statistics here. I put statistics up comparing the UK, Italy, and the EU. I choose Italy partly because it has a very similar population share than the UK. So roughly 11.5% is the population share of both the UK and Italy. You'll see significant differences there. You know, the overall success rate across the EU in the final column towards the bottom is 33.37%. Very similar for the UK, bit less for Italy. So we had a similar success rate to the EU. Italy had a slightly lower success rate, but look at the number of successful applications. Italy, 754, UK, 186. Pathetic. Okay, so we had 3% of successful projects. Italy had 12.6% of successful projects. So certainly the UK is not engaging with this program. There is plenty of scope for people to apply to this program. And obviously on the basis of our success rate, we could do a lot better than 186 applications. Okay, right, before we go any further, I'm just going to check back to make sure there are no other questions that have come in. Nope, good. Okay, eligibility criteria. Just basic practical requirements. You have to be public bodies or non-profit organizations. So this is open only to the non-profit sector, public bodies or charitable non-profit organizations. There has to be some sort of evidence that you've got the capacity to carry out this particular project. However, I mean, if this is a small-scale mobility project, this is not a very onerous requirement. But in the application form, you just have to give some evidence of your expertise and ability to organize projects and activities along these lines. One of the countries participating in the countries, the 28 member states of the European Union, at least one member state must be involved. That seems fairly obvious. Geographical balance will be taken into account. So when they're selecting, they would like to involve as many countries as possible. Well, given the UK success rate is so low, the UK is certainly underrepresented. So that's not a problem in the future, I'm sure. I'm sure they would welcome more applications from the United Kingdom. Apart from the member states, there are potentially other countries to participate, which could be the accession countries, the countries of the Balkans, Serbia, Montenegro, Macedonia, Bosnia, and so on, Turkey, the EFTA countries, Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, those countries. So all these could participate, but they have to sign a memorandum of understanding. And at the end of last year, none of those countries had signed them, but they may be signing them at the moment. So we'll just need to check on the website to see whether any of these additional countries have signed these particular agreements. General principles about the award criteria. Okay. This is a program which makes it absolutely clear that this program should be accessible to everyone without any form of discrimination on any grounds whatsoever. They're very keen to promote equal opportunities, and they want to see if that particular attention can be given to hard-to-reach groups. They're also interested in multilingual projects or projects that relate to the multilingual character of the European Union, and again, underrepresented groups. So equality of access is an important principle here. Transnationality. So what they're looking at is transnationality here. So not just the involvement of people from different partner countries, but also the ways in which issues can be tackled from a European perspective by comparing different national points of view, the cooperation of countries, the dissemination of results across borders, and so on and so forth. As well as all that, they do make the point in the final one that these programs should have a strong local dimension. They should be reaching people, in their daily lives. So this is not supposed to be an esoteric program for only a selected bunch of high flyers or university graduates or whatever it might be. This should be a very broad-based program involving the widest range of participants and having the widest possible impact across Europe, even if only a small number of countries are actually involved in the actual activities. Intercultural dialogue, very keen intercultural dialogue, bringing together European citizens of different nationalities and language, raising awareness of the richness of the cultural and linguistic environment, and so on and so forth. I mean, again, I hate to keep referring to the tragic incidents in Paris recently, but given those developments and so on, I think, the Europe for Citizens program is a very interesting opportunity to explore some of the issues that obviously arise as a result of what happened in Paris, about the way in which Europe can develop and productively take on board a range of different beliefs and traditions and so on. So, this may be something that the Europe for Citizens program could be a very, very appropriate starting point for interesting projects. Volunteering. They're very interested in volunteering and ways in which projects might address people who do participate as volunteers, or ways in which issues around the theme of volunteering might also be explored. Right, the specific award criteria. So we'll go through the individual strands and look at the award criteria. Okay. Now, this is simply summarizing the way in which it works. So as all programs these days, there is a standard set of award criteria. We know what the award criteria are. We know what the various scores are. And the way in which it works is that there will be jury members. In this case, the evaluation committee includes European Commission and officials who will then sort of take into account the recommendations that are made by independent experts, that they will be invited to look at the different applications. It's a standard way in which these decisions are made these days. So the first award criteria, 30% of the mark, consistency with the objectives of the program. This is all fairly straightforward stuff. I mean, you know, there's nothing hugely complicated about this. Appropriateness of the objective of the project with regard to the objectives of the program, how they contribute to the achievement of the objectives of the program, and if there's the thematic focus must be in line with the objectives of the program, and also taking into account the annual priority. So this is how the project relates to the overall objective of the program, and that's worth 30%. 35%, the quality of the activity plan. In other words, what you are going to do. The fact that the activities must be appropriate, the fact that there should be coherence between you know, what you're trying to do, the inputs, the resources that are required, and so on, the cost effectiveness of the project, the European dimension of the project, the ways in which your project might gather different types of organizations or establish different sorts of activities, or citizens coming from different target groups, and finally, the way in which you might use new working methods or innovative activities to work in this particular project and involve people with fewer opportunities. So this could be the use of new technologies or any other innovative way of implementing your project, innovative way of using social media and so on. And dissemination number 3, award criteria number 3 is dissemination, which is 15%. This is ways in which you are going to exploit and disseminate the results of the project, both, you know, to make sure people are participating in the project and also to disseminate the results once the project is over. They're very keen that there should be a multiplier effect, so that the beneficiaries are not just seen as the people participating in the project, but there'll be something emerging from the project that will have a wider circulation and potentially a wider impact, that, you know, that you can sort of effectively transfer the results of the project so that others will benefit as well. And in criteria 4, it's 20%, is the overall impact and the citizens' involvement. So, you know, what they're looking for is projects which will have a high impact, irrespective of their size, projects which have some potential for sustainability, so they have some sort of long-term impact, projects which actively engage people in the project. This is not just a matter of sort of turning up and listening to somebody or watching something else, but some ways in which people are engaged. A balance between trying to get people involved, some of whom may already be sort of keenly involved as volunteers, and others who may not have been involved in anything quite like this before. And then finally, involving citizens from underrepresented groups. So those are the 4 standard award criteria. Okay. For the individual strands, there are then separate criteria. So those 4 criteria apply to the whole program. There are then some separate criteria for the individual strands. European remembrance. Now, this is interesting because the first bullet point has been there for some time. Reflection upon cultural diversity and common values, particularly reflecting on the courses of totalitarian regimes in Europe's modern history, especially but not exclusively Nazism, fascism, Stalinism, and so on and so forth. Then there is this second bullet point, which is new for this current round. Other defining moments and reference points in recent European history. Actions which encourage tolerance, mutual understanding, intercultural dialogue, and reconciliation as a means of moving beyond the past and building the future, reaching the younger generation. So they have broadened the initial scope and focus of this particular strand. So European remembrance is not the obvious areas. I mean, it may well be that your projects might focus on those areas, but it's about a broader range of areas as well. Different types of organizations, different sorts of activities, citizens from different target groups, and there should be a transnational level. So those are the additional criteria that I would expect to see in Strand 1, European Remembrance. In terms of practical organization, types of organizations, anything, including, as you can see, cultural organizations are mentioned here. Number of partners. Entertainingly, I think it says a project must involve organizations from at least one member state. So you only actually need one partner, in other words, yourself. But it does say preference is given to transnational projects, but they make no rules about how many. Whether that should be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, it's entirely up to you and your project. Do bear in mind the maximum you can get for this project is €100,000. So don't be over ambitious with these particular projects. Activities must take place in any of the eligible countries, and your project can last for no more than 18 months. So relatively small scale activities, 100,000 and 18 months. This is an example of a project that was funded under this particular strand in the past. This was a theatre play focusing on the disabled Holocaust, stories of residents at a German sanatorium in the 1940s. The play toured around Scotland and England, and they also invited European partners, included after-show talks and audience engagement. I mean, I think actually this project was only a UK partner, but they involved European partners in terms of presenting the show and inviting people to come and participate in the performances that were held in England and Scotland. In the first round, which was last year, there were 2 successful UK projects. The Imperial War Museum had a project based on World War I called the Positive Propaganda Project, and the Netherhall Education Association had a project obviously based on the collapse of the Berlin Wall. So those were the 2 successful projects in that particular strand. UK projects, I mean, there were plenty of others from other countries, I should stress. Okay, strand 2, democratic engagement and civic participation, achieved at all stages. Agenda setting activities, advocating through preparation phase and negotiation of policy proposals, providing feedback on relevant initiatives that are implemented, and so on and so forth. So this is sort of trying to help people engage with what the European Union is trying to do, either in big picture policy issues about the sort of Europe 2020 agenda, or in maybe specific policy activities that the European Union is trying to implement, whether that's in areas such as climate change, or it could even be in areas of creative Europe, in culture or audiovisual or whatever it might be. Okay. This also covers, you see at the bottom there, projects and initiatives to develop opportunities, mutual understanding, intercultural learning, solidarity, societal engagement, and volunteering. So a very broad way of involving people in discussions, debates, projects, activities related to people becoming more engaged in the democratic processes under which the European Union seeks to, be a strong force in Europe's future history. Strand 2.1, town twinning. Town twinning, bringing together a wide range of citizens from twin towns. So this is particularly focused, this little strand here is focused on twin towns. Okay, so you have to be involved in twin towns. I mean, essentially, municipalities which have signed or engaged to sign twinning agreements, or municipalities having other terms of partnerships. So you see this is very focused on local authorities, or it can be on independent town twinning arrangements, but one of those 2 have to be involved. So here in the practical terms, you'll see the types of organizations are towns or municipalities or their twinning committees or other organizations representing local authorities with some sort of town twinning or similar sort of agreement. At least 2 countries, minimum of 25 invited participants. So if you're organizing something in the UK and you want to invite a twin town in France, then at least 25 people from France would have to come to the UK. I mean, you could have 500 people from the UK involved in your project, but you must have at least 25 people from France coming over to participate in this activity. The maximum you can get is €25,000. So this is quite small scale. Activities must take place in any of the eligible countries, and the maximum duration of this individual meeting is 21 days. So I think that's all fairly straightforward. Here is an example of a project which was intercultural dialogue between Germany and Poland, where they brought together these towns, and they involved cultural activities, choirs and youth orchestras. They did a range of social activities. Museum organized a conference, library organized exhibition, and so on and so forth. So, fairly straightforward, which was bringing towns together, looking at shared European history, and then participating in a range of arts and cultural events and other gatherings as well. UK-led projects, I mean, these are the sorts of projects that have been supported in 2013 with the UK, Newcastle City Council, Aberdeen, Bristol, Newbury, Wigan, Ammanford, and Leek. So a range of different projects under that particular strand. Networks of towns. Now, this is municipalities and associations working together on a common theme. Now, it seems to me, when I read this, that setting up an association is something that can be done fairly easily. I mean, obviously, if there is some sort of already existing network of towns, which doesn't, not necessarily town twinning, just a sort of network of people who have got together and said, well, you know, we've got some common interests. We would like to develop a network whereby we share activities and so on and so forth. But you could do this, it seems to me, you could do this yourself. You know, if you could find some towns you would like to work with, you could set up an agreement to work with these towns, hopefully get that supported by your local authority. Doesn't have to have financial support, your local authority just endorses it. And then on the basis that you have this network of towns in place, you could then make an application to develop some projects or activities. And Strand 2.2 will support the bringing together of people from this particular network of towns that you're involved in or that you've set up to undertake some projects such as listed here. Networks of towns, a range of activities around the subject of common interest, define target groups for which particularly relevant. Well, that could be cultural organizations, for example, serve as the basis of future initiatives. So hopefully this would build or would enable people to sort of, you know, develop these links and then build other collaborative projects in the future. Any sorts of organizations, providing that they are some sort of, they have some way in which they can claim to represent the local authorities. So there has to be some endorsement of local authority support for this particular network in order to get, you know, to be able to make an application. It says here, in addition to the applicants, non-profit civil society organizations can be partners. So, you know, you could have cultural organizations falling under that category. 4 eligible countries, of which at least one is an EU member state. The minimum of 30% of invited participants. So if you've got 100 people coming, at least 30 of them must be from outside the lead organizer's country. You can get up to 150,000 euros for this, and you must do at least 4 events per project, and you can do this over a period of 2 years, 24 months. Okay. Here's an example here, the place of culture in tomorrow's Europe. The partner countries here were quite extensive. France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Greece, Malta, Portugal, United Kingdom, and also Tunisia. And they had a series of interregional meetings and a forum where they brought together citizens from these 3 different areas. And what they did here was a particular focus on culture. You'll see in the second bullet point here, they place culture as a central key issue in the construction of the EU. They organised 3 large debates and then a large European forum. These are some of the organisations in the UK that were involved in submitting applications for this particular strand here. Okay, and finally, strand 2.3, civil society projects. So again, I think I've banged on about all the sorts of themes we've been talking about under Europe for Citizens, and this is about undertaking projects which are going to address these themes as well. So this is sort of like a bit like strand 2.2, but on a bigger scale. So agenda setting activities, feedback on relevant initiatives. This is particularly about engaging. This particular bullet point here is about engaging with what the European Union is trying to do. Then it goes on, projects can stimulate and organise reflection, debates and other activities, looking at developing solutions to some of the challenges faced by the European Union. Again, these could be the challenges that have been reflected in the events of the last week or so. Actively involve a large number of citizens and hopefully encourage the development of long-lasting networking between organisations active in the field. So this is another theme here. Projects implemented by transnational partnerships are to be recommended, and they should involve at least 2 of the following activities. So of those 3 bullet points, you need to involve 2. Promotion of a societal engagement and solidarity, promoting debate, campaigns, actions on themes of common interest. The second one is gathering of opinions of practical Applicants can be any sorts of organizations, including civil society organizations, including cultural organizations, as can the partners. So the partners can be civil cultural organizations as well. Number of partners, at least 3 eligible countries, of which at least 1 should be an EU member state. Maximum eligible grant, 150,000, any of the European countries, and the maximum project duration is 18 months. Here is an example of a project, International Playback Theatre Activity for EU Migration, which was a relatively small amount of money, which was simply about sort of exploring a particular focus about how EU immigrants integrate into society, another important theme these days. Members involved in the project from Lithuania, Ireland, and Great Britain made performances in the communities of local people and Lithuanian immigrants in Ireland and Great Britain. So you see the different partners were involved in slightly different ways in this particular problem. And what was important was that during the performances, participants discussed the importance of EU values, understanding, and so on and so forth. And they then produced a variety of documentation. They shared the experience with colleagues from other countries, and so on and so forth. So I think you can see this project. Other examples of projects in this particular strand, the FAIR Trials International, European Young Defenders Network, Community Service Volunteers, C4, University of Birmingham, Euclid Network, not ourselves, but another organization, the Media Diversity Institute, British Council, your locality, European Alternatives. So a range of different sorts of projects, some of which indeed had a cultural focus in their activities. Okay, before we go on to grants, I'm just going to go back and just double check to make sure that everybody is still with me. See whether or not we have any further questions. Yes, well, I hope everybody's still with me. People may have fallen asleep, but for those of you who are still awake, we shall keep going. Okay. So looking at specific grants here, there are 2 types of grants here. There are action grants and operating grants. What I say here, there are 2 types of grants available for the entire program, but we are not looking at operating grants. Operating grants are grants provided for the support of organizations, and that only applies to a few limited networks operating at the European level, and that's not relevant to today. So we're going to focus on the action grants, which are granted for the projects and so on. So we're focusing here on action grants. Grants are calculated on the basis of lump sum financing. Lump sum financing is an easier way of calculating finance because it simply gives you a particular lump sums based on certain factors in your application. So what this means is that it's quite straightforward to work out how much money you're going to get. You don't have to worry about going into detailed budgeting and sort of estimating how much it's going to cost to do this, that, and the other. They will simply calculate a lump sum based on the factors which I will talk about in a moment. So these lump sums cover all sorts of things: costs of staff costs for the project, travel and assistance for participants, room rental for running meetings and so on, the communication, dissemination, marketing costs, the coordination costs because there's several organizations involved, research and IT tools if you need to do some preparatory activities for the project strands, and so on. So everything is covered under a lump sum arrangement. And you'll see at the back of the text that I sent you this morning, there is a sheet which summarizes the lump sum maximum amounts available there. But what we'll do is we'll just go through those as well. For town twinning, the lump sum is based simply on the number of participants invited. So depending on the number of participants, you will then get a certain amount. Quite straightforward. For the other strands and measures, there are 3 parameters. So it's the number of participants, the number of countries, and the number of events. So depending on those 3 factors, there will be various calculations done in order to determine the overall amount. Then, as it says there, the lump sum is determined by taking into account the number of participants, number of countries. Then in the case of several events, then what they do is they add up the lump sums corresponding to each individual event, because obviously different events will have different levels of participants and may take place in different countries. So they work that out for each event and then add them together, and that's the amount that you can apply for. Lump sum principles. So just to be absolutely clear, these are the 5 principles. The wonderful word unicity, a unique approach irrespective of their particularities except for the town twinning. Simplicity, used immediately, not complicated. Transparency, absolutely transparent, it's clear as to what you're going to get. Equal treatment, so it's a non-discriminatory project, irrespective of the country of origin, it's a flat rate. And efficiency, so faster processing of final reports and consequently faster payments of grants, so that's quite a good thing as well. So depending on depending on the location of the organization, you get a grant decision or a grant agreement. As far as applications from member states are concerned, you get a grant decision. If you're outside the EU, such as a candidate country or Serbia or Turkey or whatever, you will get a grant agreement. You can start immediately if you get a grant decision upon receipt of notification. You can get on with your project. There's a website there if you want to look at those particular documents. So financial rules and regulations, financial capacity, so they will check that you have the stable and sufficient sources of funding, declaration of honor that you're not being bankrupt or being wound up and so on and so forth. If your grant exceeds 60,000, you need to submit a financial capacity form and lots of financial statements for the last financial year. Unless you're a public body, if you're a local authority or some sort of public body set up by an act of parliament or whatever, then you don't have to provide all this information. They may ask for further information if they do, but I would think that most applicants may be applying for less than 60,000, in which case the amount of, you don't even have to fill in a financial capacity form, so it's, it is relatively straightforward in terms of checking out your financial capacity. The co-financing principle. Interestingly, they do say that the union grant cannot finance the entire cost of the project, but that's it, full stop. They make no statements about any sort of levels of match funding that need to be provided. That's entirely up to you. You need to demonstrate that there is some other money that is being generated to help pay for the costs of the project, but there is no guidance as to how much or where that comes from or anything else under the sun. That's entirely up to you. And there are also grants for preparatory activities. So if you're running a project in either Strand 1 or 2.3, then there may be need to do some preparation or some research, and you can get a limited lump sum to cover those additional sorts of activities. Only one lump sum of this type will be awarded per project. So before you actually start the project properly, in terms of before you have your meetings or activities, if you need to do some additional research, you can get a bit of extra money, also as part of a lump sum agreement to undertake that sort of preparatory activities. Non-cumulative award, quite straightforward. Each project only gets one and only one grant. If you're hedging your bets and you're applying to different funding programs for the same activity, then you need to tell the Commission, and obviously they will. You can only accept one award if you are successful from both. Projects cannot make a profit. And interestingly, however, it also says this shall not apply to grants based on lump sums and to grants lower than or equal to 60,000 euros. So they're not actually going to check if it's less than 60,000 euro, and a basic lump sum grant as to whether that actually happens or not. It's quite interesting financial statement of that. No retrospective grants, so you can't spend money on activities that have happened before you receive notification that you've been successful. You can, however, you can do activities, but you've got to be very careful about how you sort of do anything before. I mean, the general rule that we always advise people is not to do anything before you've got your grant agreement or the notification of the grant decision sorted out. The Commission takes no responsibility for funding anything before those particular dates. So don't think you can get any money for retroactive projects. Subcontracting is allowed for technical services, legal, accounting, tax, human resources, or implementation. So implementation could be, goods and services. If you're running an outdoor event, you might want to hire some staging or lights or whatever, and you may have to subcontract someone to provide those. That's all absolutely fine. The two final bullet points are important. Only a limited part of the action, and it must be absolutely necessary for the implementation. That's all fairly clear, so fairly straightforward. Pre-financing. So you do get pre-financing except for town twinning. So town twinning, very small grants, no pre-financing. But for networks of towns and European Remembrance and civil society projects, you can get up to 50% of the grant in advance. Okay, so they will give you that sort of money in advance within 30 days of the signing of the agreement or the notification of the grant decision. So you do get money up front, which is quite useful. And your final payment will probably be paid more quickly than some other projects because of the lump sum agreement and the fact that the financial assessment is much more straightforward. If the financial capacity is not satisfactory, then there may be a need the other way around. They may need some sort of financial guarantee before they'll give free financing. None of this applies to public bodies, and I'm not sure it will apply to anybody really, because I can't imagine that any applicant would have problems demonstrating their financial capacity. So let's move swiftly on from that. You can revise the grant decision and grant agreement, within writing. You can write to the agency at least 1 month before the end of the project, and you can extend the project up to a period of 3 months. So there is some flexibility about making changes to your project once your project is up and running. Final reportings must be submitted within 2 months and must give a description of the results of the project compared to what you said you were going to do. And there must be the final report and annexes must be all included in order to release the final payment. And there's a website there that gives you information about what they're requiring in that stage, all fairly straightforward. The final payment, just making absolutely clear, this is a maximum amount that is available. They won't increase, and they may, depending on the delivery of your final report, they may reduce. If there's fewer participants participating in the project than you claimed for, then obviously the final payment may go down. So you just need to make sure that you meet the objectives and targets, at least meet, if not exceed, that you included in your original application. Some projects may be subject to an audit, so do make sure that's possible. That could happen, and therefore keep all the receipts and invoices and everything else that you need to keep. Keep that shoebox in the basement in case an audit might happen. Okay, and finally, visibility and publicity. The European Union wants to make sure that it maximizes the promotion and marketing of these projects, both to sort of show people that these are good projects supported by the European Union, and also to demonstrate the impact and the potential impact of the results and outputs of these projects. If you receive a grant, then you give the right to the Commission and the agency to make use of the results in their own promotion and marketing materials and their own directories and databases and so on and so forth. And what they will expect you to do is to make sure you promote the project, the fact that it's happening, and also then promote the results of the project. You must make obviously sure that you mention the European Union support in anything like this, particularly if you're sending out press releases or any other announcements or producing publications. Then the European support from the European Commission must be made clear, and that's fairly clear in the way in which the final grant agreements are drawn up as well. They will publish this information on the internet. That's just to sort of make that absolutely clear. You can get out of that if you've got some good reason. I can't imagine what a good reason might be to getting out of not allowing the European Commission to promote and publish your project, but it is possible, they do say, to get out of it. Valorization, so this is what they're talking about in terms of disseminating, exploiting the results of the project. Beneficiaries should carry out activities aimed at making the results of their project more visible, better known, and sustainable. There may be promotional activities involving volunteers, T-shirts, and identifying the project participants, anything that you can do that's going to promote the activities and promote the potential of the outputs and results. Okay, making a submission. There is an electronic application system. This is a completely electronic system, unlike the culture program, for example, where you need to print something off and post it. This system is completely electronic. It starts again with the registration for the PIC code, the Participant Identification Code. This is a fairly straightforward process that organizations should do. If you've done this already for the culture program or any other programs, you should be able to use the same PIC code. Applicants will also need to fill in the legal entity form and the financial identification form, which simply states what sort of organizations they are, the fact that they are not-for-profit, and gives details of their bank accounts and so on and so forth. This is all fairly straightforward. Step 2 is to create and fill in the application form, the e-form. So you go to the agency's application e-form homepage, open the form, fill in all the data, submit the declaration of honor, and that's it. Okay, don't, as I keep saying there, don't send anything by post. You simply fill in the various parts of the application form and then press the button and off it goes to the agency. The agency may then ask you to send some additional documents. And this is a list of the sorts of documents they might ask you to send. Copy of the official VAT document if you have a VAT number, copy of resolutions establishing the entity. So, you know, if they want to justify, if they want to be clear that your organization has been legally established, and they may ask you to send something. Financial capacity forms to non-public bodies for grants requests over 60,000 euros. All those forms can be downloaded there. And for town 20 and networks of towns, they may ask the proof that your organization is acting on behalf of one or more local authorities. That is, if you're not a town 20 association or a local authority yourself. Okay, that's it. That's the end of the information about the Europe for Citizens program. So again, standard points. You can get more information if you sign up to our Twitter feed. Decide which strand is right for you, how ready you are, which deadline. 1st of March is coming up soon, but the application process is relatively straightforward. Have a really good idea. I think there is so much scope for good ideas under Europe for Citizens program, particularly in Strand 1 Remembrance and Strand 2.3 Civil Society Projects. I think there's some really interesting potential for ideas involving cultural organizations making contribution to these sorts of debates at the European level. Find and secure your partners, a little less onerous than in the culture program, for example, but still obviously important. That's the standard slide about what Euclid provides. I don't need to go on about that anymore. And that's the end of this particular webinar. Right, I shall go back to the standard so you can all see me. If anybody has any questions, then do feel free to send me any questions you may have at this particular point. Otherwise, you can send me questions by email if you would like to after this webinar is over. Given the fact that there is no contact point in the UK, we are trying to give a little bit of extra help to organizations to make their applications here in the UK. But I think that, you know, this is a relatively straightforward program with one of the simplest application processes. So if you can find the right theme or project idea, then I think that this is a potentially valuable opportunity. And given our high success rate and the few applications we put in, I think there is scope for a great many more applications from the UK. And obviously applications from other countries as well, as I know we have some people from other countries who are participating in this webinar. Okay. I will wait here a few moments more in case anybody has any questions, but as I said, you're free to email me questions if you have any. Okay, well, I don't think anybody else has any more questions. So on that basis, I will bid everyone farewell. For some of you, I will I'll be back online tomorrow, just before 1 o'clock, for the next webinar, which will be on the Erasmus Plus program. That webinar will definitely take up the full hour, because there is a lot to cover, a lot of detail in that particular program. But thanks very much for joining today. And if you're coming back for another webinar, I'll speak to you soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.